to stand up.
Princess.
Anastasis, same thing. Ex Anastasis means to stand up and out of, and it all means the resurrection. Philippians 2:13, I think is what that one, and then a gyro. Gyro means to raise up. That's what's used usually when the Lord raises stuff up in the resurrection, all right? The Catholic Church idea of Easter is that Jesus died on Friday and that he rose on Sunday. Many Bible scholars today believe that he was actually crucified on Wednesday, and his body was rapidly prepared for the grave, and on Friday morning that they did the final burial of him, and that he raised early on the day of first fruits. The day of first fruits. Now the Jews don't celebrate the day of first fruits after Jesus' resurrection, because Jesus was raised on the feast of first fruits. How many of you knew that? He was raised on the feast of first fruits.
Well, is that on the Jewish Sabbath?
Yeah. Now when did the feast of first fruits begin? When does the Jewish day begin?
Temple back, wasn't it?
Huh?
When they took the temple back, wasn't it?
Well, no. Let's get on back now.
6 o'clock
What? 6 o'clock p.m.
Oh,
p.m.
yesterday.
Oh. They've always been.
Now the Jews start the day off, start eating dinner and resting, going to bed. That's how they start their day off. Eat and go to bed. That's what they do. It started, actually, if you want to really get down technical, Easter started yesterday. If you look at it from a Jewish standpoint, the Feast of First Fruits started at 6 p.m. yesterday. Now, the Bible says that Jesus was raised early in the day, wasn't he? He could have been raised, basically, late Saturday night or early, into the early Sunday morning, all right? Because actually, Sunday begins at 6 o'clock p.m. Friday evening. The Sabbath day begins when? When does the Sabbath, Jewish Sabbath begin?
Sunset.
Huh?
Sunset, isn't it? 12 o'clock, I think.
At 6 o'clock Friday until 6 p.m. Saturday. All right, that's when the Sabbath actually is. Did you know that? No. All right, that's it. So we got us a little bit of history down here now before we go on to any place else. All right.
Yep.
The early, yes, ma'am.
Seventh-day Adventists, they kind of believe in this some way, because I know they
Yeah,
don't
they
do
do.
anything
They take on, they're like the modern day Judaizers.
Yeah, they don't do
Okay.
anything till after 6 o'clock on Saturday.
Yeah, they started that just a few years ago when they discovered this. That wasn't going on. I mean, as people began to do that, they said, well, now if we're really going to be accurate, we better do it at 6 o'clock. The Sabbath is 6 o'clock Friday until 6 o'clock Saturday.
They don't believe in the new law. They're still living under the old law.
Let's get into the resurrection. All right. All right. Anastasia. Does that term look familiar? All right. Anastasia.
Russian princess.
That's like it is in English, okay? Anastasia. Now, what Russian princess
Anastasia.
in Russia? What was her name?
Anastasia.
Anastasia. Anastasia. That's really her name means the resurrection. All right, Anastasia means the resurrection. All right, in the early Greek thought, resurrection was a pagan idea of transmigration of souls. All right, transmigration of souls. Ancient paganism did a lot of ancestor worship. All right, now where do we find ancestor worship today? In Buddhism,
Eastern religion.
the Eastern religions, all right, all of these, the Buddhism, Rosicrucianism, reincarnation, Hinduism, and even and some Native American Indian culture today. This just cropped up, actually in the 1900s. All right. Now there is a triune realm of everything out here. Okay, a triune realm. We know that man is triune and God is triune, isn't it? Let's draw 3 circles up here in our minds. All right. Here's God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Here's man. It is body, soul, and mind, or body, spirit, and soul or mind, okay? And then angel, the angelic order. The angelic order. Let's look at that for a moment. Here, God does things in triune things. By the way, how many heavens how many earths are there going to be in all time, throughout time? We have the earth that was, the earth that is, and the earth that shall be.
3.
A lot of threes in the Bible, all right? Because of the person of God, all right? Now, angels. We have Michael, we have Gabriel, and we have Lucifer. 3 orders of angels. We have Michael in the spiritual realm. We have Gabriel in the informational realm, these personal communication devices, all right? That's Gabriel, all right? And then we have Lucifer in the material realm, physical realm, all right? All right, go on. Now, Michael's powerful angels and spirits have been held in jail for a long, long time. Some of them after they rebelled. Luke, the 10th chapter, and verse 18, the Lord said, I saw Satan fall as a bolt of lightning. In Revelation 20 and verses 1 through 3, it talks about, I saw an angel come down from heaven having a key of a bottomless pit and a chain in his hand, and he laid hold of the dragon of old, the serpent, the devil, Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. By the way, we have the word Satan, ha-satan in Hebrew, or Satan. What does Satan mean?
One who opposes?
One who opposes, the one who stands against. And what happened in eternity past, Satan rebelled against God with spiritual forces, and he took of these 3 realms, the material, the spiritual, and the informational realm. Some of those went with him. All right? Some of those went with him. In 1 Peter 2 and 4, it says, For God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down into hell, delivered them unto chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. In Jude 6, it says almost the same thing, that the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, had reserved in chains of darkness unto the day of the great day of judgment. All right? Now, we know that in the world, we have good example in the Gadarene demoniac in Luke, the 8th chapter, verses 26 through 33. That Gadarene demoniac was indwelt by hundreds of demon spirits, fallen spirits. Wasn't he? He was powerful. And drugs today, and even in the book of Revelation, it says that the people wouldn't lay down their pharmakia, their drug abuse. In drugs, in the drug culture, is also demonism. People get very strong when they're hopped up on PCP and stuff. You can't stop them. One law officer out here shot one guy 9 times with a 9mm, and the guy come and took his other second gun from him, away from him, and shot him with it. Hard to kill. All right? Demonic forces. All right. The whole of seances today and the communication with the dead. You know, we hear about that all the time now, don't we? About communication with the dead. It comes out of this Gabriel's realm of demon spirits and angels. Back, we studied this a couple of weeks ago. Remember back in 1 Samuel? What happened back in 1 Samuel? Remember when Saul went to the witch of Endor and asked her to bring up Saul? They were practicing this. This practice goes way back a long time ago. The whole of seances and the communication of the dead is out of the transmutation of souls and all of this idea. All right? How many of you ever heard of Buddha? Huh? Buddha? If you go down at Bill Lee's Chinese restaurant, they got a Buddha sitting out there in front of it, and you look over there, you can see where those guys rub Buddha's belly for good luck. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever been there? And they rubbed Buddha's belly for good luck. Who was Buddha?
He's just a man.
Just a man.
He was a guy that lived a long time ago, all right? And he was scared to death of reincarnation. Did you know that? He was scared to death of reincarnation. And those people over there in these countries where they believe this so strongly in India, they won't eat any meat at all or any animal life. Only vegetables. You know why?
You better eat their relatives.
Because they're afraid they're going to eat their relatives. That's right. Aunt Jane is that bug over there now, or that fish swimming around in the sea. Buddha was so afraid that he was going to become a fish or a flea or a fly in the other life. He sat down for like 7 weeks underneath the tree and refused to eat or think about anything else. He was going to get some information. He got to have to figure out some way to get out of this reincarnation business. Transmutation of souls, all right? So he sat underneath that tree and kept on praying to whatever he thought was God, or his aunt and uncle, the ancestor worship. He was scared to death he was going to be reincarnated into an elephant or a cow. You know, in the Brahmin culture, the highest form of God is a Brahma bull or a cow. That's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? But he sat there, and then finally, for about 3 weeks, he supposedly received a revelation. And that revelation told him that if he would refuse and deny his body of all earthly desires, food, female companionship, any type of pleasure, that maybe, if he was good enough and denied himself of all these things, that maybe when he died, he would just go out of existence and go into soul sleeping. This cease to be.
Yeah, that's what they call a great void.
Yeah, the great void.
Fake nods, didn't he?
Yeah, that's what your agnostics and things think today. They didn't think of it first. Buddha thought of it first. So he says that if I can do without any, if I can cut myself away from all earthly lust and loves and pleasures together, maybe I can just go into soul sleeping when I die, and I'll cease to be, and I'll be like they say, Fido, when he dies.
Fido?
Yeah. Well, Buddha was so terrified of reincarnation that he was seeking some alternative view of eternity. And so he wanted to just go off into and cease to be. His family, he had a wife and he had a child that came up to him, and they were standing there begging him to come home and feed them and care for them. And he would not acknowledge them as his wife and child at all. He was going to stick to his guns and deny all earthly ties and all earthly relationships.
Isn't it possible if he starved himself that bad he was hallucinating?
He was probably doing a lot of things. All right, now let's go to the Bible. Okay.
Like some people will say, like, when you said Buddha did that, you know, what about, like, Paul? He, they say he left his family too, though.
Paul's family left him.
Oh.
Paul's family left him. They buried him. Paul was married. He had children. His wife, they had a mock funeral for him. They buried him and buried him when he became a Christian. He was no longer part of their society any longer. All right, now let's go to the Bible. Genesis 5:24 says, and Enoch walked with God. Actually, what it says in Hebrew, Ha Elohim. And what does Ha Elohim mean? Linda, you remember that? Ha Elohim. The God. The God. Not a God, but the God. The Creator. He walked with the God, and he was not, for God took him. The whole plan of salvation depends upon a resurrection, not soul sleep. Now, Enoch got to go right into the presence of God. God decided to do that to two people in the Bible. Two people. Enoch was one, and who was the other? Got translated. Raptured. Elijah. All right. These two people got to go right straight to be with God. All right. The resurrection. As we study about the resurrection, the Feast of First Fruits. The Feast of First Fruits. What kind of an idea is the Feast of First Fruits? How do you get first fruits?
From the first fruit.
How do you get wheat?
Planting and cultivating.
You plant something. You bury a seed. All right? You bury it. So basically, and the Lord said the seed has to die. And then when it dies, it what? It brings forth life. And how many fold? All right?
100-fold.
100-fold sometimes. All right? Allergies. All right. So a grain of wheat goes in the ground and it dies and then it comes up, and they would bring in first fruits, the Feast of First Fruits. They would bring them in to the tabernacle and the temple area, and they would bring these first fruits. First fruits is a type of resurrection, by the way. It's a type of resurrection. First fruits is a type of resurrection. Okay? And let's look and see what the gospel is. In the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians. That's very simple. You'd be surprised. One time I went into church out in the back country one time, and I preached to them, and I told them that I wanted to know what the gospel was, and they said the gospel was the Bible. Because it's called the good news. You know, you ever see that little Bible called the good news? All right? They thought that the Bible was the gospel. I said, no, the Bible isn't. And boy, it's like this. I wasn't preaching in Indiana one time in the church, and I started getting up and I started talking from Hebrew and from Greek a little bit, and one of the deacons stood up and voted me out of the pulpit. I didn't know what I was talking about. And the pastor had to get up and defend me. He said, that is the head of the Bible department out there in California. This is the professor of Bible languages that you're kicking out of the pulpit. And so they voted to let me go ahead and finish my sermon if I would be good and not preach some other different Bible than what they had.
You tame it down a little.
Tame it down just a little bit. Because King James was inspired, you know. All right. Well, anyway. Anyway. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter. As I preached in that church, after a year or two, I finally could say, what is the gospel? And I said, where is it found in the Bible? And they say, 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter. And they believed it too. That's good. They believed it. Now I make known unto you the gospel, the Apostle Paul says, when I preached unto you, which I also received, in which ye also stand, by which ye are saved, if ye hold fast to the word what I preached to you, unless you believed in what? Vain. Put that word vain. Circle that word vain for a minute. We're going to see it again now. How do you believe in vain? How do you believe in vain? All right. For I delivered unto you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that He was buried and was raised on the third day, what? According to the Scriptures. The Old Testament Scriptures, by the way, there weren't any New Testament Scriptures yet, were there? Verse 14 says, if Christ be not raised, then our preaching is what? In vain. If there is no resurrection, we have no story. And your faith is also in vain. The resurrection is a paramount Bible doctrine in Job 19:23 and verse 24. Job wished that his words were inscribed in stone, that the whole world and through all the history of mankind could hear these words. And by the way, Job got his wish. Job says, oh, that my words were now written on, that they were printed in a book, that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives. and that he shall stand on that latter day upon the earth. And though my skin worms destroy this body, in my flesh yet I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself with my own eyes, and behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. Job believed in the resurrection. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, everything is appropriate in its own time, but though God has planted eternity in the hearts of men. God planted eternity in the hearts of men. Why do little children believe that there's something else besides just now?
They're smart.
You know, Helen Keller was blind and deaf and had no communication. Finally, when she got to where she could communicate, her teacher asked her, Helen, did you know there was a God? And you know what she said? Always. Always. God has planted eternity in the hearts of man. We know we've got an eternal future. It says God has planted eternity in the hearts of men, even so man cannot see the whole scope of God's work. We learn a little bit about it, don't we? From the beginning to the end, as we look at this chart up here, look at that. From the beginning to the end, of course it's covered up partially now, but there is a plan. God has a plan for mankind, doesn't he? From the beginning to the end. All right. Back in the Old Testament, Jacob believed in a resurrection. He believed in the promises of God. And I want you to think about Jacob, and I want you to think about Isaac and all of these people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of these what we call patriarchs. Did any of them ever realize the promises of God? Ever. But they passed it on to their children. Even those ungodly Jews over there in the land today that want the promised land right now without accepting the Messiah. They're not going to get it until they accept the Messiah. I'm going to tell you so. I don't care what they do. America couldn't fight a war from them. Nobody, they couldn't. I mean, they got the greatest army in the world, but I'm going to tell you something. That army is not going to bring Israel into their hands. The Messiah is going to hand that to them, but they won't get that Messiah until they recognize him. All right? Jacob said, and he believed that someday he would be resurrected, and he begged that his bones would not be left in Egypt, but that he would be buried in the promised land. And in Genesis 47, 29 and 30 it says, and the time drew near that Israel must die. Israel is Jacob, by the way. Okay. And he called his son Joseph and said unto him, if I find favor in your sight, I pray, put the hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me, and bury me not here in Egypt. But I will lie with my fathers, and you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in the burying place. And he said, I'll do so. Why did he want to do that? Because he believed the promises of God. He believed the promises of God. Joseph, now, look at Joseph. Joseph, when he died, all right, remember, go back into Egypt. We talked about this a little bit. He believed in the resurrection. He believed that God someday would give that land to his people. The Messiah would bring it. In Genesis 50 and 24 through 26, he says, and Joseph said unto his brothers, I'm dying. God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land. Now, how long was Israel down in Egypt?
400 years.
400 years. 400 years. That's 2 times, almost twice as old as America is. Do you realize that?
Just walking around, doing nothing.
Right. 400 years down in Egypt. But he said, God is going to remember his promises, and he's going to bring you out of this land. Like he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and shall carry you up out of here, and I want you to carry my bones with you. Don't leave my bones in Egypt. All right? Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and they put him in a coffin in Egypt. And then hundreds of years later, they took that coffin and took him into the promised land and buried him when they went into the promised land. Think about that. They remembered it. It was very important to him. In the old... Yes, Brother Brett.
They were in Egypt 400 years.
Yeah.
How long were they in slavery?
Not 400 years.
Yeah.
Probably, well, it was it 430 years altogether they were down there. I can't remember the exact date, but they were in slavery probably 300 and something years at that time. All right. It says later a Pharaoh was raised up that did not know Joseph. What do you mean it did not know him? He wasn't related to him. They were actually related to the Egyptians. Did you know that? They were related to the first group of Egyptians, what they call the shepherd kings. All right. Now, in the New Testament, there's over 300 predictions of Christ's coming and his resurrection. Did you know that? There's more than 300 predictions of Christ's coming. He was going to be born in the right place. He was going to live in the correct place. He was going to be born where?
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, in the city of David, as a descendant of David. When Jacob was dying, he blessed, and he said that the scepter would not depart from Judah until Shiloh come. Israel was supposed to have a king. That was not an afterthought of God. When they called for Saul, David was always supposed to be the king of Israel. He was going to be the king. God had planned for that. And his descendant would be the Messiah, according to Luke, the 3rd chapter. All right, and Matthew, the 1st chapter. We have a lineage that goes all the way back through David. All right. There are over 300 predictions that Jesus would come into this world, would be born in the right place, Bethlehem of Judea, and that Herod would even try to have him killed. He killed all the babies, didn't he? The Bible said that that was going to happen. And it says that he would call his son down into Egypt. Joseph was called on by Gabriel to go down into Egypt, to take his son down there, and then Gabriel appeared to him again and said, go back home. Now where was home for Joseph? Where was home for Joseph?
Egypt.
Nazareth.
Nazareth,
And it says that he would be a root out of dry ground. Nazareth means root. All right? Nazareth means root. All right? And that's where Jesus was raised, probably as a stonemason. Joseph was probably not a carpenter, but a stonemason. Every term, there are no carpenter terms used, but all stonemasons terms. Jesus said, I was a stone which the builders rejected. Jesus is the rock. He is the foundation of the Lord's church. He is the rock which the church is built upon. He said unto him, you are Peter, Petros, but upon this Petra, Peter means a little stone, but on this Petra means gigantic foundational stone, I'll be building my church, and the gates of hell shall not wrestle her down. All of these are stonemason terms. All right? So he's taken back into Nazareth. He was raised in Nazareth. And then, where was he crucified? He was rejected. He was smitten of his people. You know, in Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53, those psalms were written before crucifixion was ever even invented. But it said that his hands would be pierced and his feet would be pierced in the house of his friends, by one of his friends. The only disciple of Jesus that was prophesied in the Old Testament was who? Judas Iscariot. All right. In the New Testament, there are many predictions of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Matthew 16:21, 17:9, 17:23, 20 and 19, 28, 8 and 10. Mark 8:31, 9:9, 9:31, 10:34. Luke 9:22 and 8:33 and 24:16, 31 and 39. John 20:21 and 27. And the book of Acts The early church witnessed about Christ's resurrection in Acts 1 and verse 22, 2:31, 34, and 4:33. Nearly all of the New Testament epistles, one of the basic themes was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Without the resurrection, there is no gospel. All right? Without the resurrection, there is no gospel. Now let's think about something for the next few minutes in conclusion. All right? Jesus had power over death during his ministry, did he not? Talitha kume. What did he say in Aramaic? Maid, arise. He spoke to the maid that was dead. She was dead. And he said, Talitha kume, maid, arise. And what did she do? She stood up from death and she ate. And she was restored. So he had power over death. One time, well, in Mark 5, 40 and 41, Luke 8, 54, and 7, 14, Matthew 9, 25, John 11, 37, all of these say that Jesus had power over death. He had power over death in his ministry while he was on this earth. The dead are raised. Isn't that one of the things on John the Baptist? His disciples came to Jesus and they said, are you really the one? And what did he say? The gospel is preached to the poor. The dead are raised and the blind see. These are messianic credentials. All right? The dead are raised. Anybody ever raise the dead in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were what we call God's samples of what the Messiah would do. There are people that were raised from the dead in the Old Testament. There was a leper healed one time in the Old Testament. Jesus healed a lot of lepers, didn't he? And that was a fatal disease. They thought that only a leprosy could be cured by God, divine power. And how did Jesus cure those lepers? Because he was divine. Death could set no boundaries for Jesus during his ministry or even his death. When Jesus was on the cross of Calvary, he, what was the last words he said? In Hebrew and Aramaic. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. What did he do? Psalm 22 and verse 1. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then finally, he was not killed, but he gave up his spirit. He released his spirit. All right? The old devil tried to cure him. Oh, Satan. Satan. Ha-Satan. Satan. He tried to kill him. He tried to destroy him. You know that when Jesus was taken before Pilate, Pilate declared him innocent how many times? Now, Pilate was the absolute ruler of the world in order at that time.
3 times, I think.
How many times did he declare him innocent?
I thought it was
5 times.
5 times?
5 is the number what in the Bible?
Grace.
All right, 5 times he declared him innocent. And what did they? They called for his death. And then what did he do? He said, now wait a minute. He said, we got a thug, we've got a criminal, we've got a killer and a murderer here, and his name is what? Barabbas. Barabbas means what? Son of the Father.
Yeah.
Boy, his father wasn't God. Son of the Father. He said, now, this guy has killed your children, he's hurt your relatives, he's murdered somebody in almost all of your families. Shall I release Jesus or Barabbas? And what did they say?
Barabbas.
Barabbas.
Because he was the innocent one, that's why.
Yeah. Jesus was innocent. Jesus died for the guilty. We're Barabbas. Yeah, we're Barabbas.
Can I ask a cross-reference that real quick?
Yes.
On Adam and Eve, you know how, because Cain, he was the bad one, and Abel was the good one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then he was the one who got, Abel was the one who was killed. He's the innocent.
Yeah.
And Cain was let free, you know?
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with
He
it?
went into the land of wandering, though, didn't he? And
Those
he got
things-
replaced. He was replaced. He replaced Abel and he replaced Cain. Abel was never a threat to Cain. Never any threat to him. Cain was the heir, not Abel. But Cain was not worthy of heirship. And he proved it when he murdered his brother, didn't he? He proved it when he murdered his brother. All right, Jesus said he's the life and the resurrection in John 11:25. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet he shall what? Live. All right? And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Absolutely. Jesus said he has power over your life and your death. Did you know that? In all reality, we don't control our own destinies. We aren't our own people. The Lord has power over you now and in eternity future. John 11:26. Do you believe in me? If you do, you shall never die. We're not going to soul sleep. We're not going to go and become a flea in the next life, Brother Brett.
I don't think that.
We're not going to be a fly for somebody to swat. We're not going to be a fish for somebody to eat. We're not going to be a cow for McDonald's burger. Not going to be somebody's dog or a skunk. We're going to be in one place or one or two places in all eternity. The resurrection is never referred to as an awakening of the soul, but a raising of the body. Never an awakening of the soul, but a resurrection of the body. Baptism itself typifies what?
The resurrection?
Burial.
The death, burial, and resurrection. Now, what did Jesus look like after he was raised? What did Jesus look like after he was raised?
Supposedly a spirit.
Huh?
A spirit.
No.
He was a man.
He was physical. He was material, raised as a material person, but glorified, all right? But glorified. Raised material, but glorified. Now, just think about it for a while. He appeared to Mary. Did Mary know him when he appeared to her? No. He appeared to two disciples on the way up to Emmaus. Did they recognize him?
No.
No. All right. Now, I will tell you a little story about a friend of mine. I had a friend of mine that lived down the street from me. He moved into my neighborhood when I was pretty young. And he was down there cutting a car up, and the car blew up on him. Blew up. He was a real handsome, tall man. And when the car blew up on him, it just blew him and burned his face all up, his arms, his hands, everything. His whole torso was just burned. He was up in the Kern General Hospital for months, doing skin grafts and everything on him. And when he got out, I went down there, and boy, he just looked terrible. But he was still a strong man, and I worked with him every day. I loved him like a father. And when I looked at him, I did not see all of those scars. Didn't see it at all. Didn't see the scars. Period. We would go out to Kmart or something like that, and people would just go like this when they'd see him. Just back off like this. And I'd look and I said, what are they looking at me like that for? And then I realized they were looking at my friend. Looking at my friend. There was a little girl. This little girl grew up, and she was pretty ashamed of her mother to go out with her in public because she was burned real bad. She was really burned. And finally she got older, and she asked her mom, Mom, what happened to you? And she said, well, she told her daughter, she said, when you were a baby, we had a fire in the house. And it just exploded. The house just exploded with fire. I ran back in the house. I ran to your bedroom, and I wrapped you up in the baby clothes. You were in your crib, and I got you out of the house, and you weren't hurt at all, but I got burned really, really bad. And that's what happened to me. That little girl looked at her mother in a different way before. That was her mother saved her life. She got those burns, saving her. Now Jesus, when Jesus was raised from the dead, Mary, when she recognized Jesus, he spoke to her, he said, Mary. And she said, Rabboni. And she spoke to him Aramaic. When he spoke, when she heard his voice, she recognized him. In Zechariah 12:10, it says, they'll look upon whom they have pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and they will weep bitterly over him like bitter weeping over the death of a firstborn. And then it says in Revelation 5 and 6, the lamb standing as having been slain with the marks, the scars of slaughter on this lamb. Okay? Now the disciples that went on this 7-mile Bible study with Jesus, they said, who are you? You know, he said, and they were talking, they said, and they said, don't you know what's going on? Didn't you hear about Jesus? And he said to them, he said, why, isn't that what's supposed to happen? Wasn't he supposed to die? And it said he opened the scriptures to them, and for 7 miles he taught them a Bible lesson. And they didn't recognize him. And finally he went into the house, and the guests of the house at that time, when the guests of the house had meal with him, the guest broke the bread. Didn't they? They was the one who broke the bread and handed the bread out. But it says that Jesus blessed the bread and broke the bread. And I believe that when they saw his hands, they saw the marks of the cross. You know, and they went back and told about what happened with the disciples. And there was a guy there named Thomas. And Thomas says, I will not believe that he was raised unto the dead until what? I see the scars in his hands and his side, and I put my finger in the scars. And when Jesus walked in among that room, he looked in there and he said, come here, Thomas, thrust your hand in my side. And he said unto him, my Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. My Lord and my God.
That was Judas' replacement?
Huh?
Was that Judas'
No.
replacement?
Thomas.
Thomas was it?
Thomas. All right. For all eternity, maybe, our Savior will wear the scars of the cross. You know, in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, verse 15, he made a threat to Satan. The Lord did. He made a threat to him. Genesis 3:15. He said to him, you're cursed above all the animals of the field. All right? And then he said, and the seed of the woman and your seed will have active hatred between them. And you shall bruise him as to the heel. That's the scars of the cross. But he shall crush you as to the head. In Romans the 16th chapter and verse 20 it says, and the God of peace, Paul's writing to the church at Rome, and the God of peace shall soon crush Satan under your feet. Referring back to Genesis 3:15. You know, when our bodies are raised and we go on to be with the Lord forever in heaven, Satan is going to be in a different place. Crushed forever. Crushed forever. That's it. That's it. Brother David. There's the story of the resurrection.
Good job, Jim.
Is that all right?
2 more cards on
Is that going to be your sermon?
That's going to be
the
my
next,
sermon.
the next one? Okay, so that was a warm-up.
That was a warm-up.
For the finale. Okay, on our prayer list today, David would like us to pray for his family to return to church and pray for Debbie, who